Now we're on to episode 6 of the top 5 greatest players for each NBA franchise. This time, it's the Cleveland Cavaliers. For those that haven't seen the other videos, I got the playlist in the comments. You can check it out. I'm going in city alphabetical order. So we start with the Atlanta Hawks, then with the Boston Celtics, the Brooklyn Nets, so on and so forth. Now we're at the Cleveland Cavaliers. This is where it starts to get more interesting because the way I'm doing these lists, I can only use a certain player for one team. I can't use a certain player twice, which I decided to do because that makes it a little more interesting. You get to give different players shout-outs and acknowledgments, which will come in handy with players like LeBron James, Shaquille O'Neal, Tracy McGrady. If I can only use them once, I have to pick a team to put them with. And then, that makes the rest of the list a little more interesting. So with that being, this may be popular with some other people not so much. But with that being said, we'll see how it goes. And now, we're going to start off top 5 Cleveland Cavaliers with a few honorable mentions from LeBron James' first run. Anderson Varejão, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. You guys remember him. He spent most of his career with the Cavs. He was the key role player for them during the LeBron era, and then during the rebuilding years with Kyrie. He finished off his tenure with the Cavs right before LeBron came back. And the other one's Zydrunas Ilgauskas. He was with the Cavs for a while. He was one of LeBron's reliable teammates during the first tenure with the Cavs. And matter of fact, him and LeBron had enough of a chemistry where Ilgauskas followed him to the Heat. But Ilgauskas was a good role player for the Cavs. Wasn't great. And same with Anderson Varejão. Wasn't great, but they were both good role players and fit the system well. And they were reliable enough to have lengthy runs with the Cavs. But they didn't do anything great, which is why they're only honorable mentions. Now getting to the top 5. This is where my list gets a little interesting. Some of you guys may not be familiar with him, but Austin Carr. He was a Cleveland Cavalier during the late 70s into the early 80s. He only made one All-Star appearance, but he was the first star player they had. He was at one point considered Mr. Cavalier. This obviously being years before LeBron James, Kyrie Irving, Donovan Mitchell, and those guys. And speaking of honorable mentions, 2 more. Darius, Garland, and Donovan Mitchell are honorable mentions. The reason I got them as honorable mentions because the Cavs, they're still early in their tenures with the team and they haven't done anything big yet. So I'll put those guys as honorable mentions. Maybe a few years from now, maybe a Donovan Mitchell breaks into the top 5. But as of now, I just got him as an honorable mention. And same with Darius Garland. But yeah, Austin Carr was the first star player the Cavs had. He had his jersey retired by them. He wasn't great, but this was during a tenure where the Cavs didn't really have much. And he at least was a beloved figure with the Cavs during a time period where they didn't have something. So I felt he's at least worth making the list. Now, maybe a few years from now, he'd slip into the honorable mention. Maybe a Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland worked their way up. But as of now, he's number 5. Moving on to number 4, Mark Price. He was a good shooting guard. He was, when the Cavs were a playoff team in the early 90s, Mark Price was the go-to guy. He was a 4-time All-Star. He had his jersey retired by the Cavs. He was an excellent three-point shooter, one of the best of his era in the early 90s. And he was a 2-time contest winner during that stretch. So Mark Price, he was one of those forgotten players, but one of those three-point shooters of the 90s, back during an era where three-point shooting wasn't as predominant as it is in today's era, but he was one of those guys. Definitely deserves a nod. I'm going to go number 3, Kyrie Irving. I'm using Kyrie for the Cavs. He was the number 1 pick in 2011 out of Duke. He made 4 All-Star appearances as a Cav. He also played alongside LeBron James. He was a key factor to that 2016 Finals win, particularly in Game 7. Kyrie had himself a good game, helped the Cavs win Game 7 and complete the only 3-1 Finals comeback in NBA history to date, alongside LeBron James. Even though the early years, Kyrie was good statistically, but the Cavs were still struggling as a team. However, Kyrie also plays a role, not just for his individual performances, but his individual performances in those years LeBron was absent when he was off in Miami was enough to convince him to come back for a second go with the Cavs and to help them win their first championship. And Kyrie was a contributing factor to LeBron coming back and a contributing factor to that 2016 Finals win. And he was also